You are now in the realm of enlightenment and transformation.
Welcome to Chief Speaks.
All music performed and produced by Yu Ya.
Enlightenment and transformation. Enlightenment comes from allowing yourself to journey through the dark shadows of death, the primordial abyss of wisdom's waters. For it is the treasures and mysteries that lie wait in the dark that transform us and propel us to a new enlightened state. One should neither aspire to live in the light nor the dark, but should journey between the two in order to evolve the overall reality into a self-actualized creation. Knowledge is your light as wisdom is your darkness. The bold interplay of the two in your life leads you to an enlightened understanding of yourself and the universe you've created.
I love you so much because you just don't know what you've just done for me. Thank you so much.
Wow. This is like the best call I've had in ages on BTR.
So this show was meant for me to be able to hear today, and I'm so thankful.
That's his home.
Therefore, now a new pathway has now been cut in order to get to the Almighty, where there may not have been one. So the communication with them, if they have enough power and strength to talk to us, the communication will be very clear.
That's one of the reasons I don't get into the current events thing too much, because it starts to become a perpetual alarm clock that we just keep hitting snooze on. I speak to the ascended masters, quote unquote. I talk about spiritual stuff, but I also speak about some very practical, we can do today things.
Be as natural as you can be with your spiritual. You can't always go by your feelings, because your feelings are corrupted. Your feelings are just as corrupted as everything else, your chakras and everything else. You got to know what's beyond you, and that's why we have elders. We can't do everything. You can't get everything out of books or weekend certification. You can have the most powerful, ancient, oldest, most, as far as you know, truthful tradition in your hands, and if you still have a dirty spirit, you're not going to get anything out of it. You're not going to learn anything. You're not actually going to grow. I try to teach in a way where I make myself obsolete. That's always been my goal, to make myself obsolete.
I really wanted to, kind of big you up. I think you're awesome.
There's a lot of elders out here right now that want to know what's going on. They're not getting on Twitter and stuff like that, but they want to be up on the new stuff. Sit down and have some conversations with them. It's not always about hearing their story. It's also about being news reporters for them and letting them know, like, yeah, this is what's happening right now. They may tell you something about what happened in Charleston that you couldn't even. Your spirituality has to create same spiritual family. Okay, and that family exists first inside of you. You have to express the different expressions of that rainbow coalition of spirits inside of you first. Okay, don't let communities hijack that rainbow. See, the problem is when we come into the conscious community, the dudes are doing the same thing that the women are doing.
I just want to say that I really enjoy your show every Sunday, and my friend and I call it going to church. When we call him, we'll be like, "You going to church?" And I'm like, "Where have y'all been at?"
God cannot go against its own truth. So anytime you have an inkling that God is going against its own truth, then God is no longer behaving as God. So therefore, the spiritual community doesn't recognize God. You dig where I'm coming from? Or can we have a new thought? Can we step outside of the books for a second and have a new conversation about hair weaves and wigs? Can we have a new conversation about homosexuality? Can we have a new conversation about vegan eating? What are we doing? It's a good day for an exorcism. Good day for
test. It divided the team. No, oh no, I'm no hero.
Just give me a moment here to greetings. And of course, let me welcome all of you to Chief Speaks on Enlightenment and Transformation. I want to say peace to everyone in the chat. Of course, I do see you. And welcome to all of the newcomers. I think I see a couple of new folk. But welcome to everyone who's coming in fresh and brand new. And of course, to you all who have always traditionally stopped in from time to time to see what is going on with us. So, let me just welcome you. And, I always like to give some energy to the, to those individuals who come in later on via archives or some podcast channel and however you get here. But, thank you for coming up and showing up. Okay, let me get rid of some of this. I have too many notifications popping up here. So anyway, we're starting a new topic this month, and many of you know how this goes now. We've been doing it all year, of course, starting from January on down, but we've been focusing and concentrating on different themes each month and different topics to explore. And of course, they are all linked and tied in together, and in fact, all really tethered, to one central idea. And, I would have to say, in a greater sense, what we are dealing with this month, being the topic of nation building, everything that you have heard and all of the ideas that we've explored and the different concepts and themes and topics it's all truly really tied and tethered to what we're going to speak about this month, which is nation building and empire building and kingdom building, because though we develop ourselves as individuals and we strive to go through various experiences to increase our own awareness and to increase the value of our life experience, ultimately it is to further the group. It is to further the collective. Even our journey through life is a furtherance of the collective. Coming from a place of unification, coming from a place of oneness, and that place I speak about is the unseen and unheard of place that we cannot touch in this form, but where everything was one, where everything is connected, and we come down to experience this human reality to expand and further and to succeed what those before us have done, so that way when we go back to the oneness, we go back with more and we go back with greater measure. So, of course, ultimately it's about building the nation, building the family, continue the ancestral work. So I want to give thanks, before I even begin this, quick little housekeeping. We have a men's call today at November 5th, but today at I believe 1 p.m. All right, there will be a men's call, and we'll be furthering some work. I've read the prospectus for the call, and it's going to be a lot of things covered. So men, as you participate, sometimes I notice the men have a really bad tendency of not creating space and time, making it sacred. When they're on the call, they're doing 5 million other things with background noise to accompany the experience. So try to, if you can, to give yourself some moments of stillness to just sit with your notepad and just really go through it and really learn and soak up, as opposed to multitasking. I know a lot of times we hail multitasking as this great and wonderful thing, but often it causes us to lose our footing with what's going on in the moment. So I urge you to do that. And as far as the women's call, we're working on it, right? I'm going to tell you the biggest challenge. So I'm going to just put it right out there on the public table in the public forum. The biggest challenge with the women's call right now and getting that ministry going back again like we had it is bringing in mature, responsible elder women. That's actually the problem. That's actually the challenge that I'm working through right now. So a lot of sisters have reached out, and I want to be a part of the women's community. That's cool. That's great. But that eldership is critical. And I'm not just talking about some of you older women. We do have older women and are new, but not all are ready to take on that mantle and really that title and that role as the mother. We have a lot of older women in our new who don't realize they're old, who don't behave as elders do. So they have some of the same dysfunction and the same vices as females who are 40 years their junior. All right. So I'm going to give that as an answer for everyone. It's like, just so you know that I'm not discriminating against the women's ministry or anything like that. In fact, that was the first one. The men's one came later. I wasn't even really concerned about a men's ministry, to be honest. I only wanted a women's ministry, as far as an annexed experience to what we've been doing with Anu. But yeah, finding those responsible older females who can kind of really serve as Jegna to the younger junior women has been very challenging. And the ones who may have potential to do it, they just don't feel like it. They don't have the sense of urgency or really even just a sense of compulsion to want to do something like that. So some of the sisters who have stepped up and said, "Oh, I can lead the call," and stuff like that, you're just not ready. You're too young. You're too inexperienced, and you just don't have the insight. So it will not work out properly. So we have a role for elders in our communities. We have a role for Jegnas, and sometimes, sadly, they're just very scarce. All right, so that is what the holdup has been. All right, just to let you know, it's not me, or maybe it is me. I guess I have to take some of that blame in there, because of the fact that I am very discerning when it comes to that, and so I guess I'll take the blame. But I'll tell you why I have been moving so slow with it. All right, and just some of the back end challenges. So obviously, if I'm making that clear and I'm putting out in a public forum, I'm also doing that to express that, well, this is what's needed. So for those of you older sisters who are listening, and are thinking how you can contribute and how you can help, that's one of the things that's needed. Some gray hairs in the midst of women who really want to come and serve that role. And in general, not just on this, not just what I knew, that's a general issue in our community is eldership. So, I'm not blaming it on like just our new folk, so I don't want you to think that like it's a new phenomenon or anything like that. That has been an ongoing issue in our community, not having sane and especially not having responsible eldership, having those older folks who are willing to cast some of their isms and their character defects to the side, or at least work through them so that way they could properly, perform in their divine given role. So, the challenge that we're having with the women's group is just reflective of, what we're having in our external larger communities. All right. So that is the hold up. Just finding good counsel, good older counsel. All right. And I also wanted to, before I pushed any further, give a hearty and heartfelt thanks to the family in Toronto, Canada. They definitely are doing some beautiful things up there, man. And a lot of times, especially, the focus is always on the American diasporic manufacture, because what we've manufactured here in terms of personality and spirit certainly is a very unique thing, not to really be found anywhere else. So a lot of times it's sad and it's backwards, but people often who are from the States think that everything emanates from the States outwards, or it's this the only thing worth doing is things that are being done here. But I definitely want to give some honor, man, and some appreciation to the family up north, man. Like I said, they're doing some wonderful things up there, and they certainly are showing a lot of love to the family down here, and to those who are doing the work or just doing the teaching, which is a small part of the work. But they're definitely showing a lot of love to them, and they showed myself a lot of love, as well as, just the family here as well. So, man, so I want to definitely give them another thank you for handling things professionally and governing the whole experience in a way that was just beautiful. So always give thanks for that. And remember, December 1st through 3rd, I will be doing different forms of experiences. We'll say events in New Orleans, December first to third of this month, and we are in the year 2017. And the reason I say that is sometimes when I give event announcements, a person will come in and listen to an archive, like 3-4 years later, and might not necessarily look at the date and say, "Oh, you coming to my town in next month?" Like, no, that was 3 years ago. So I'm just gonna say the year 2017. All right, I will be in New Orleans, and the Friday night I'll be at I think it's called the Craig Center. I'll post some information on it, but that Friday I'll be doing a really good workshop. Well, I think it's a good workshop, surrounding healing, and really healing in purpose. All right, so that one should be really good, man. I think a lot of people are gonna, they're probably gonna cry. Because I know we're gonna pierce into some really important things that individuals are dealing with, and me, I'm all about the solutions. So obviously we're going to talk about some solutions and really what's readily applicable, immediately applicable, and moving forward past some of the things that have caused some clogs and blockages in our pipelines of our consciousness, and really just achieving what it is that we're most happy to elevate to achieve, right? So we'll be dealing with that in New Orleans on the 1st, and then the 2nd, we're gonna do a Sisters Temple there. We're gonna do like a nice little workshop, more like an intimate little workshop, and like a little chi fufu wine and little rolled up tiny sandwiches thing. So on Saturday evening, it's going to be a nice little intimate set, man. I'm just going to, be talking and building and, doing a nice little Q&A and just really, 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 really connecting with those who come through for that. And like I said, we're going to be a little chi fufu. So I will put some essential oil on my knuckles, get the ash off, and my elbows. So we'll be doing the chi fufu thing Saturday. And Sunday, we will be in Congo Square. I'll be holding a healing tent where you can come in and get readings and get work done. Light work. Head washings and things like that. That will be in Congo Square. All right, on that Sunday. That's going to be most of the day, Sunday. So you can sleep in that doing. All right, and then I'll be there like the strong after as well, just doing consultations, meeting with people, things like that. All right, that was one of the challenges in Toronto. I actually should have stayed a bit longer because there were a lot of people who wanted to consult, and I had some things I had to do, so I scheduled kind of tight and left a good amount, of people who were saying that they wanted to link with me. So I'm going to not duplicate that mistake in New Orleans. All right. I'm going to, so I'll be there for the strong to try to make sure I'm available for as much as I can be for the family there. And everybody has different schedules and stuff. And with that said, I'm actually coming back to Toronto in January, the end of January. We're working out the details now. It's looking like it's going to be the last strong in of January. I'll be coming back to do a larger event, actually, a larger workshop. And I have some other ideas that I'm bouncing around to kind of connect with the folk up there as well. But that's primarily also because so many people were saying, I didn't know Chief was in town. And then emailing me, Chief, why didn't you say you were going to be in Toronto? I'm in Canada. I did say it. I said it. Even sent out 2 newsletters. We said it. We sent out the newsletters, and I put it on social media, even sat there, did a little video and let everybody know I was coming, well in advance. So, hey, I said it. But, when I was up there, I was getting all these emails. And the funny thing, it was really like the day I was leaving. Yeah, I think it was the day I was flying out. I got bombarded with emails. I'm trying to schedule some time. I'm leaving. I told you the day I was leaving. So I'm coming right back to Toronto. I guess that's like 2 months, something like that. So it gives everyone time to get prepared and get ready. All right. And I'll try to, I'm going to try to spend a little longer there. So that way, we don't have that happening again. But first announcement. And I think I even put an announcement. Yeah, I did a little video on Instagram and Facebook the other day. So actually, this is my second announcement. Yeah. All right. So I just wanted to, let the folk know what's going on. And I got some other things coming up too, but I'm not going to announce them yet till I'm positive that I'm actually going to be doing them. So once I kind of say yeah, I'm gonna do it, then I'll let you all know. All right. So I'm not going to bounce around as much as I do sometimes. For those who've been coming to lectures and stuff, you guys know I kind of I travel a lot. I'm all over the place. But I just don't. I'm not feeling that anymore. Well, I'm not feeling that in this season right now. So the events that I do now are very personal to me. So it's different. Like the events and the workshops. Like I'm really enjoying the intimate workshops. Like I'm really enjoying. Even if I do a large seminar, I'm really enjoying carving out space and time to actually talk to people, like one-on-one. To have those whisper conversations, where it's, I didn't want to say this in front of you, but I'm actually at this stage enjoying that a little bit more, kind of really getting to know some of you and really getting to give more individualized counsel. And sometimes it's just listening. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's not about some great medicine. It's just sometimes individually listening. So yeah, I was able to do that in Toronto, met, like Brother Logan and Sister Malika, and of course Brother Victor and his Empress and his family, who brought us up there, and all the crew, who came through and showed love, and I'm enjoying that aspect a little bit more. So, I've been getting a lot of messages, when you come here, when you come in there, if it's not an experience where I could really touch the folk, I probably won't come. Just so you know, I probably won't come. Like if it's something like, oh, they're having a big such and such family day over here, and they have bringing all these speakers in. That's cool. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I might send a donation, but I'm at a place now where I really want to kind of talk to some of you. But yeah, man. So like I said. You got some of the announcements, and we are dealing with the concept of nation building this month. And why is this such a critical concept? And like I said, it's really tethered to some of the dialogues that we've been having, like really all year, of course, but not only just all year, but going back to last year as well. I mean, ultimately, all of this is about not just you being able to personally enrich yourself, but ultimately it's about you being able to succeed in where your ancestors left off, and where not just your ancestors, but even some of our living elders today who are, really facing, the struggle, and really in the trenches of defeating the ideas of the conquest of their people, and really trying to create a more prominent idea of success and entrepreneurship and empowerment, and really trying to keep their culture from being sent into a spiritual and racial oblivion. So the work that we're doing is certainly about making sure that we're not culturally alienating ourselves from our highest ideas, and making sure that we're not disfiguring some of our traditions just so that we can kind of blend into the propaganda of how it is that we're told that our outlook should be, and we're told that our behaviors should be, but we're making sure that we're tapping into the essence of where we are spiritually, and the conceptions of how we began, and the conceptions that we hold of the very nature of our beings, So like I said, everything is tethered to that. Everything that we've discussed, and I mean everything, down from like how do you build a solar generator to, Masterminds Mondays, all of those financial talks, and, dealing with, of course, the spiritual aspect, the political aspect, the cultural aspect, how we deal with our children, all of the mating talks, all the time you heard me say, you need to get a man, and messing with you with that. It's all ultimately really an education, or for some, it's a re-education for us to really determine what the greatest aspects of our destiny is going to be, and not just always being slave and subject to the political and economic whims of different civilizations that we consider or that we're told are superior to our own. So the idea of nation building, right? It really helps us to understand that some of the assumed, we'll say, parallels that have been drawn between our current journey and the journeys of other people may not necessarily be accurate. When we're moving and we're striving towards a nation building kind of reality, we recognize that we may have unique origins, and those unique origins express themselves and build themselves into an identity that has certain parameters and certain imperatives that don't necessarily need to be substituted for things that are inferior. And we can determine what's inferior. Like when we look at the idea of, sometimes you hear like cultural appropriation, or we hear ideas talking around like borrowing or stealing, and of course, obviously it's three different terms with the same outcome, but three different incentives, or intentions behind it. If you're cultural, if you're appropriating someone's culture, if you're borrowing someone's culture, and if you're stealing someone's culture, right? This obviously the intent may be different. The motivating factors may be a little bit different, right? But if you think about it, when you're borrowing something, especially from a nation or from a culture, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the presumption there is that you're borrowing from your equal, and you don't mind lending because you're lending to an equal. Just like if you're lending money to someone, or something, if you're lending it, you have the expectations that the person can return it. That's why you're lending it, right? They can give it back. So there's some level, obviously, of peer relationship there, or of equality, represented there. So sometimes it's important for us to look at, if we do consider our own culture or our own aspirations towards nationhood to be inferior to, superior to, or equal with, those that we are choosing to either, steal from, borrow from, or appropriate, right? So when you start to educate yourself in the way of employing the indoctrination, the necessary indoctrination of nation building, you start to become more in tune with some of your own subconscious subservience, to different groups that have actually been vanquished, but you may not know it, because it's very easy to plant certain suggestions in a person's mind. So like, I'll give you an example. Spirituality, right? And of course, many of you know we began our journey dealing with spirituality because that's the root of things. One of the key factors, and I'll take it to the African mind because I am most qualified to speak about that mind, because that's the mind that gave birth to me. Some Africans somewhere had a thought and said, let's make this guy Yuya, and boom, 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 boom. So I can speak about that with a little bit more authority, as opposed to trying to usurp my ideas into somewhere that I was never invited to be. So when we look at the African construct and mindset of spirituality, much of it revolves around the physical awareness, or our physical being an extension and an actuating of a spiritual being. So essentially what we're experiencing is just an unfurling, like which I talked about in the last segment, right? It's just an unfurling of what we've already concocted spiritually, right? And because it's an unfurling or it's an actuating, we recognize that there's a oneness that we may share and that we may have with things that are around us. And when I say things, I'm speaking about forces. So we don't necessarily maybe operate with a culture of separation, but we tend to engage the world from a scientifical and philosophical standpoint using inquiry that's culturally aligned to our spiritual ideas, that, well, everything that we're studying and everything that we're looking at is just an extension of something that's unseen, as we are the same byproducts of that extension, of that actuating, right? So the culture that we speak about, and again, just to kind of refresh, it's the totality of our values and our principles and our mores, and the ways that we do things that categorize ourselves as a people. So our behavioral patterns and our symbols and the values and our morality and the institutions that we create become our unique imprint on society that signifies what our culture is, right? And of course, so much of this is developed within the confines and the constructs of a home, of a family, right? So, a lot of times when you hear me speak, you hear me say, yeah, man, you got to have a family. Where's your family? Where's your family? And of course, that's defined so many different ways. I'm not just saying, where's mommy, daddy, 2.5 children and a dog. I'm not necessarily speaking of that, but who's your people? When you're out here, who's your people? Sometimes I'm in the streets and I build with youth, right? And I look at some of these youth, man, and they're just out here. They're just out here, like they're raising themselves. And, I look at them and it's heart wrenching, because you just look at them and say, man, who's with you? Who's your people? Or I speak to some of these young children sometimes, man, and they come from these real backwards minded, selfish, self-absorbed, spiritually retarded and cultural crazy parents, right? And then you say, man, where's your father? I never met my father, which is a common thing. And of course, we always blame it on the father without saying, no, you're both. There's a problem with two of these people here. It's just because of the way society dictates. One parent may have the child, but it doesn't mean that's the better parent. Sometimes it's the worst parent, so we have to grow up beyond that perception. But sometimes you look at those children, it's such a sad thing. What are you connected to? Who are you connected to? And they're just out here. They're just, figuring it out on their own. And of course, making a lot of mistakes. And they just grow up into adults who make a lot of mistakes and don't really have, again, that totality of values and that totality of actions that we look at and say, okay, this is who I am. These are my people. And, their ideology that they currently have has no rooting in history. It has no rooting in their ancestral movements, their ancestral legacy. So we see that nation building becomes a critical thing, not just so that we can have things, so that we can have stuff, so that we can have wealth. But nation building is a critical motivation for those who are looking for rootage, for those who are looking for anchorage, somewhere to put their foot down, to step in and say, okay, this is my people, this is what I'm about, which is a protective thing. You see, when people know that you're connected with something greater or something bigger, they treat you better. They think twice before they do things to you. I've spoken about this in probably some of my more controversial pieces, where I've just kind of spoken about, you look at a lot of these brutality cases and you notice you don't see any strong cultural markers with the people who are victims of all of this police brutality, or these weird deaths, like the sister in the hotel, found in the freezer. What are the distinctive cultural markers that you're seeing? You don't see any. Like, you're not seeing any police brutality, like any big reports like Alton Sterling and stuff like that with any Rastas or with any Hebrew Israelites, or if any members of the Nation of Islam. Those, and I'm just speaking about individuals that have very strong cultural markers where as soon as you see them, you get a sense that they are a part of a different or an alternative group or just part of a group, period. You see? So you start to, and I'm not saying that these individuals have nations because they actually don't. I'm just speaking about things from a symbolic perspective, from a very cursory, overview. So it's the distinction sometimes of those symbolic markers, and sometimes it's the name. Sometimes it's what you name your children and name yourself. It's how you wear your hair. It's how you wear your clothes. Even it may even come down to the type of car that you drive. Begins to create kind of a collection or a collective of a different way of thinking and a different way of doing. And you start to, especially for melanoid people, you start to make it clear that maybe you're not Anglo-Saxon based. Maybe that you are a part of a group that is in alignment with its own salvation and not in alignment with its own demise. See? So coming into a place where we're deliberately building and we are, from a very sharp perspective, directing and focusing our energetic projections towards what we consider to be a cultural identity, what we consider to be statements that should be taken literally as far as our rise and as far as our elevation and as far as our ascension becomes the norm for those who are engaged in cultural building. You see, it becomes a very deliberate and active of totality. It's not just something that we do here and there because we consider ourselves to be double agents of some sorts. And, we all often have this beautiful narrative of us being the spooks who sat by the door, and I'm doing this one thing over here, but at night I'm doing this other thing, and I'm living this double lives, and that's the value of my consciousness. That's the amazingness of my consciousness and of my journey. But the truth is, a nation builder identifies with their flag, and they do it unapologetically, and it becomes again the really the total experience of what they utilize and the variety of the strategies that they utilize for their growing experience. Their actual teaching, their actual culture and family and community becomes imbued and engorged with the expectations, for the interest that they have in building a cultural awareness and a racial awareness and an academic awareness and an emotional awareness, and even an environmental awareness and a nature awareness based on the intellectual origins that they come from. So like the example I was giving earlier, I'm saying we start things with spirituality, whether it's our ideological or our cultural orientation of spirituality, but we come in that place first, at least I do. So I guess I'm being so bold as to speak for everyone else, but starting in that space where you're moving with spirit and then seeing where that then actuates to and says, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do based on how that spirit is urging and where it's moving me to go, right? Which is cool, that's a good thing. That's where we want to be. There's nothing wrong with that, right? When we are celebrating and practicing our spirituality as nation builders, right? That's for all nations of the world, whether you're melanoid or non-melanoid, right? Essentially, you're celebrating your ancestors. In a basic conceptual sense, spirituality is the celebration of ancestors. That's it. Now, I can get into the deeper aspects of it. I can get deeper in which we have. I don't have to do it now, so don't ask me, because we've already done it. We've been doing it for years. We've been doing it 6-7 years now. The deeper aspects of spirituality. But in a nutshell, if I'm speaking to a 5-year-old child, or a 6-year-old child, or a 4-year-old child, and they say, well, what is spirituality? I would say it's when we celebrate our ancestors. That's it. We celebrate the people who were alive before we were, and who did things before we were, that helped us to be here and brought us here. We're just celebrating them. And that's universal when you're dealing with the concept of spirituality. Of course, I'm not speaking to its own metaphysical or literal value, things like that, because I've already done that. We've covered that already, right? So I know oftentimes we do it in reverse. We deal with the light, cursory information, the humanizing information, and then we go to the metaphysical aspects, right? And you do that when you're raising someone on certain information. Sure, absolutely. But no, the truth is it's just celebration of ancestors. So it doesn't matter what tradition you're in. If you're dealing with, the Coptic traditions, or you want to take yourself to Ethiopia, you want to take yourself to Australia or wherever, you're celebrating the individuals who derived those calculations so many years before. You can't get around it. You can't. You only know the term Orisha, or the term Natir, or the term Kemet, or Lawal, or Nkisi, or Abosom. You only know these terms because of what your ancestors have given you to know and passed on to give you. You see? So even if you say, yeah, I'm dealing with this particular tradition, I'm dealing with this archetype, I'm dealing with archangels or whatever it is, you're always going to celebrate an ancestor because you're celebrating that ancestral genius. You see? You're not going to be able to get around that. Okay. And even if it's not a deliberate celebration, when you're nation building, you do make it deliberate. You do understand what you're doing. You do value what you're doing, and you recognize that, yeah, man, the things that I'm learning here and the things that I'm maybe even teaching, you may be going so far as to actually be teaching some of these values to other folks. All I'm simply doing is celebrating my ancestors. That's it. And to do something other than would be to celebrate the ancestors of someone else. That's it. So when I'm passing around money and I'm wearing t-shirts with money on it, and all I talk about is I have to get the money, I have to get the dollars, I have to this, that. I'm celebrating someone else's ancestors because in most senses, depending on where I live, my ancestors are not on the money in many senses. Again, depending on where you live, because, in the Caribbean or on the continent, it's a little bit different, or depending on, again, who your ancestors are, right? So, again, we see that the premier value of our spirituality is to celebrate ancestors. It is, all right? Now, sometimes through our miseducation and our misalignment with our values, especially those of us who have taken certain efforts in the diaspora to be certain things, we lose a sense of that collective identity where we lose that sense of ancestral celebration. We may talk about the ancestors, but we pretty much just try to use them. We have a very slave-minded thing we do where we only see the ancestors as valuable to our own journey. All the ancestors will guide me. All the ancestors will help me, and this and that. And we just kind of stay stuck into that space, but we don't really have the ideas, or the cultural understanding that exist, originally, right? So whether you come from Brazil or Senegal or Jamaica, or Zimbabwe or Ghana, or Baltimore, Maryland, when you're conducting yourself with the language of really colonial language, when you're conducting yourself with that language and that idea, you begin to see your spirituality with those same ideas and those same, and those same cultural ties. And sometimes you'll even find that on the continent, you have people who will speak continental languages, but they are francophone people, or the anglophone people, or lusophone people, so they don't necessarily, and Sheikh Anta Diop had spoken about that, in one of his pieces, but so that connection is still there, or that disconnection with your own internal spiritual cultural leadership. All right. And you become, like if you're in the Anglosphere, you become very Europeanized in your cultural outlook, in your cultural perspective. So when you start to connect with your spirituality and you start to connect with your ancestors, again, it's what are you going to do for me? What do you got for me? You know, you're always looking for this inheritance without realizing your nation building is really the sustained and systematic objectives and aims that construct a national, really a national identity with a culture that exists on so many different dimensions. You see, so in order to reconstruct the national identity, you have to look at, again, what it is that you celebrate, and if you're celebrating someone else's nation, or if you're celebrating your own, right? And to be very clear, when I speak about nationality in those terms, I definitely don't want you to think that I'm speaking about a bureaucratic paper process. You know, we speak about so often. I know there's been some huge efforts as of late to, you know, for different people to reclaim the sovereignty of their nation and to own and possess and connect themselves with certain nations, and the values that those nations represent. And I'm not speaking to that with it, and I'm certainly not speaking against it, but I'm not speaking of that. All right. So I want to just kind of make that clear. When we're speaking about the nationhood, you know, we're speaking about the sustained efforts, you know, that many of us are going through to uncover the very unique dynamics of our culture, and to ensure that we're not limiting ourselves by the spiritual or the ideological limitations that the people who have been our historical enemies have put upon us, you see. And so that way we make sure that when we come into our own spiritual understandings, that we're not using those limitations as our guide. So we're not limiting our ancestors to, what are you going to do for me? You know, we're not limiting our ancestors to grandma and grandpa. In fact, we're not even limiting our ancestors to our perceptions of Africa, because a lot of those perceptions are skewed. You know, we may see ourselves as global travelers and understand that defining ourselves, we may say that we're African centered, you know, so therefore our education and our labor has to be conscientiously inserted into us from an African centered perspective. So therefore, things that have been forcefully put upon us generation after generation, we now start to scrutinize and look at with our nationhood's eye. You know, we start to look at it from that perspective, and we start to look at our own internal curriculum, our own internal educational curriculum, and see if it's educating and bringing us to a place of independence and liberation, or if it's, you know, kind of taking us into a place where we're just stuck on vindication of principles and values that have nothing to do with our story. What are we claiming vengeance for? You know, are we trying to seek vengeance for what's truly been done and what our ancestors have dealt with, and then continue to evolve and refine ourselves beyond that? Or are we stuck into avenging a fairy tale of what has been done to us or what is still being done to us? You know, I see that a lot of times with many speakers. Sometimes they become masters and experts at victimization, you know, constantly speak. Well, they did this to us, and they did that to us, and they did that to us, and they did that, they did that, they did that, did that. Okay. You know, okay. It's good. We do need to know those things. You know, I'm not negating that. We do need to know, not only like you hear me say sometimes, what brings us life. You know, or as like they say on the people on those reality TV shows, this gives me life. Yes. You know, not just what gives us life, but I'm always very interested, and I think you should be as well, in the things that are killing you. You know, the things that take away life. And, you know, so you want your concept of your nation building and your striving and you're moving forward to be a reflection of volume, really, of what arises out of those efforts of people who have looked at what gives them life and the things that are taking away life, and to further the ongoing process, like I said, of refinement. the further the ongoing process of creating new paradigms and of becoming better teachers of our own world vision and really establishing our own world order that complements and sits alongside of our culture and our historical awareness and its uniqueness to the human experience. You see, the uniqueness to it. We all have a unique story, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with it. But I find that a lot of times through miseducation, many people become proponents and the greatest teachers of self-hatred and psychic dependency and, establishing more footings for the misguided loyalties to our own inferiority complex. Man, it just, sometimes we don't engage the leadership of nation building, but we engage the agents of the nation building money hustle. And most of the time they make their money, by counteracting all of the generations of the great work that some of our elders have done. So that's why I said, when we look at our spirituality as a celebration of our parents, we look at our spirituality as a celebration of our teachers, and we look at how we're opting out of, even if for a moment when we're first coming into it, but, we're opting out of a worldview of our own humanity that really doesn't really place value on the behaviors and the growing populations of those of us who are waking up. It doesn't really place value on the indicators of the movement that we're having as a people. That we actually are moving. We're getting somewhere. Sometimes our dedications are not really to our prosperity in terms of our spirituality and in terms of what we're celebrating. So, like I said, to see spirituality as primarily a celebration and not a tool to alleviate your own frustration and to try to regain some interest in the things that you've become disinterested in, and to infuse African-centered thought into what you're doing. But you start to see that it really has very little to do with any of those things. It's about celebration, and most of the time when you achieve levels of interest of spirituality and you start to interact with the motivating elements of the world or the evolutionary forces of the world, you start to see a lot of celebration, throughout seasons. You may look at animals and see them play and celebrate. You may look at things that were expected of your youth, where you're expecting a certain level of sobriety and seriousness among your youth, and you're seeing that they're very interested in celebrating, and they already may have a built-in sense of community and racial allegiance, but they want to celebrate, and you don't really want to try to step on those concepts of the development of that, because again, through your very spirituality, through your drumming and your dancing and your singing and so forth and so on, you're celebrating that full self-determination that your ancestors had in order to not only bring you to a certain place in life, to deliver you in a certain place in life, but to give you some of the greatest values of their own cultural understanding and their own spiritual way. So you start to see there's a linkage between their consistency and the simplicity of some of these actual experiences, because again, it's based on celebration. And so when those crises arrive and we have crises of identity, and most importantly, a lot of us, what we're dealing with in some of the coming talks that I'm doing, I've really been focusing on the crisis of identity and the crisis of action and the crisis of goals. Those last two being the most important ones. The crisis of goals and actions. So many of us, we come into this teaching and this understanding, and we don't really place our expectations towards self-determination. We don't place our expectations towards nationhood. So therefore, when we start to look at the things that we want to do, they pale in comparison to the greatest ideas of nationhood, to the greatest ideas of nation building. So we lose steam a lot. We're taking in a lot of information and we're learning from a lot of different people. But again, like I said, and I have said, the spirit of the people, the spirit of a collective or a group, usually it's going to take on the spirit of its leadership. It's a trickling down type of thing. So if your leadership consists of many talking heads, just individuals who just love to run their mouths, love to hear themselves and glorify the things that they're saying for the sake of hearing them, because they're just so deep, and they only provide really base adequate provisions for your consciousness, then you're going to find yourself in years listening to that for so much that you're going to have a crisis of action. You know so much, but do not know what to do. You don't know where to begin. You don't know where to put your foot down first. You don't know where the first step in getting to learn something, getting to know something, where it really lies. You don't have an understanding of any of that because, just like you've lost your identity, you've lost who I am, of course, consequently, you're gonna lose what do I do? It would only follow it, right? Who am I? Who I be? What is it for me to be? What am I being? You're going to lose that. And then the next step, well, what do I do? What should I do? What should my goals be? You see? So the crisis of that is often more frustrating than the crisis of identity, because often we don't even realize we have a crisis identity until we realize that we have a crisis of goals. We have a crisis of ambition. So, we start to come into that place where we question who can restore the history, who can really look at the cultural continuum and define certain things for us. Like, for instance, defining family. You see, we've come into a place, and this is what I spoke about last time, speaking in season and out of season, when we're speaking about our identity, or our lapse of identity, our identity crisis, right? Your nationhood gives you a cultural continuum where you can define things as simple as family, which should really be one of the simplest definitions. But when you're being tossed back and forth, like when we look at the sacred Odu of Ika Meji, and our Olodu Ifa, Ika Meji speaks about, a time when we're just tossed to and fro, all over the place, to and fro, being bounced all over the place. And Ika Meji comes to be an anchor, comes to root us. All right, here, hold still, and Ikameji is symbolized by a serpent, and the thing about that cold-blooded reptile, that serpent, the symbolization there is that it's one of the rulers of the bush. Now I know, like in Western diasporic culture, we don't, we got one ruler is the lion, right? Lion is the king of the jungle, as you've been told. I love lions, man. I love them, love them, love them, love them. I think on one of these slides you see a picture of a lion, right? But lion's not the king of the jungle. I mean, one of the kings, sure, but lion's not the king of the jungle. A lion's not going to do much with a tiger. Even though they don't live in the same spaces, but a lion ain't saying nothing to a tiger. And a lion's definitely not saying anything to a gorilla, right? When's the last time you've seen a gorilla get beat up by a lion? So sometimes you have to look at the core cultural paradigms. Or why would the lion, why would you have a culture that say, well, the lion's the king? One, because you're talking about a culture of people who like to lie all the time. So lion is king to them. But also, just the whole paradigm of how the lion relates to his woman. You lay around, as far as their perception, the lion's laying around and the woman goes out and gets what it needs, But that's just your perception if you don't understand the mortal responsibility of the male lion. But anyway, I'm just using that as a very small example. So the way we even define things becomes a part of our nation-building cultural continuum. So like I said, with the speaking in season and out of season, no, like I'm not looking at, different forms of marriage and say, well, that's a valid form of marriage. Maybe in your culture, that's cool. Your culture, sure. You want to marry your pet. I'm seeing people do that. Yeah, I want to marry my dog, and or marry this, or marry myself is another common ceremony I've seen people do. I'm marrying myself to reconnect. That's cool. You do all of that. As far as your culture, there's nothing wrong with that at all. If two guys want to get married, I don't have a problem with that. Two females want to get married, I have a problem with that. If 3, 5 different people, guys and females, want to get married, okay. But that's not a part of my cultural continuum. I don't do that. For me, that's unhealthy for what it is that my culture, my people are looking to achieve. For you, it may be perfectly fine. You see? So when you're nation building, you're not necessarily just looking to saturate the world with your culture until everybody's infested with your culture. You know, you're not looking to establish inroads of imperialism. What you're seeking to do is to find, you know, the inline. What is this? Okay, I'm seeing these little pop-ups come. I wonder if this is popping up on the screen. I'm curious. Let me just close this. I'm sorry. Somebody's telling me they're performing somewhere. All right, I'll check that out later. Must be one of my friends of mine sending a text. But yeah, so you start to see that you establish and you create goals to accommodate, you know, that continuum. So that way you become very clear on what is imperative, what is cultural request, and what is cultural fantasy. Because a lot of times there are people who request to intrude upon your cultural identity and you don't even know it. Just like there's people who request to intrude upon your personal space. And you're not in tune with your own personal boundaries. You're not in tune with your own personal space, so you let them right in. You know, you don't know. I remember years ago, I'm going to give you an example back in the days. But years ago, inside joke, there was a young lady I knew. You know, sometimes you hear me talk about people see you before you see yourself. And we were at a place, she used to sing, but she was like real young. She was like maybe 14, no, maybe 15. I'm gonna say 15, but a developed 15, hips, breasts, you know, flat stomach, or, you know, so she came into her, you know, her womanhood in that sense. And I remember we were somewhere and I was setting up, I think I might have been setting up some equipment or something, I don't know. And this guy was like, you know, he said her name and he said, you know, we're going back because the slang was different. And he was like, yo, can I bone you? Right? Said it just like that. Can I bone you? And she was like, sure. She's like, yeah. Because she didn't know what it meant, you know. And I stepped in. I was like, hold on, stop. Because you about to go over somebody's house and, you know, somebody's going to catch a case. So when I told her what it meant, obviously things changed a little bit. But, you know, that's a light-hearted example of sometimes our culture and our boundaries are being requested to be intruded upon. And we don't realize it because we're not in tune with, you know, where those boundaries lie. We're not in tune with our own cultural language. We're not in tune with sometimes the infestation that people, you know, exhibit. So sometimes what we're standing on is cultural request, or it's cultural fantasy. We have certain romantic ideas about who our people are, who our ancestors were and are, who the spirits around us are. And we're accommodating something that really lives in the realm of just implied idea, you know, just lives in the realm of interests and packages and ideas that have been administered to a people who have no footing and who have no rootage. So we have to be very careful about that. We have to be involved in the study of our culture, but, you know, we have to be more involved in the concrete and ongoing ways that we utilize to advance our interests, our political interests, our cultural interests, right? Because if we're not involved in those ongoing ways, then we begin to lose sense of our boundaries as people, as a nation, as a group, as a people. And understand, every time I'm saying we, I don't know who I'm talking to, right? I don't have a clue who the we is, because, well, I do. I'm saying in terms of you all listening, right? I know some of my we. All skin ain't kin. Just because we look alike doesn't mean we're in the same nation and we're going to be in the same nation. All right. Because our nation building and our nationhood goals should not be predetermined upon how one looks. That is stupid. And I'm going to give you a simple word. It's stupid. And that's gotten us into a lot of trouble over the years. We've looked at certain people and expected certain behaviors from them because of how they look. That's their only prerequisite. Sometimes we get into the most heinous and horrible of relationships based on the same thing. Somebody looks a certain way, so now we're in. You see that so often. You know, I've put up a couple of memes recently, just having fun with it. But I think some of you may remember, because that was a fun one that I put up with the guy crying at the wedding. And I've seen a bunch more since then. I only want to talk about that, but so it's not like I'm going to put up every one that I see. But people draw up their own story. People saw the guy crying at the wedding. Oh, this is beautiful. This is a man. That's real love. You know, I've even seen comments on some of the other ones where some of the women were like, my man better cry for me at my wedding like that. Drawing up all of these different conclusions based on fantasy and building a culture, a marital culture based on those implications and those fantasies without really knowing what the heck is going on. You don't really know and see the full picture. You don't even want to know. You ain't even thinking about it. Everything is based upon your assumption of what you're seeing from the image. You know, and sometimes we do the same thing in our culture work, in our nation building. We do the same thing in our relationships. We'll look at someone and they look like an angel, or they look strong, or they look like this or look like that, and they bring some of the worst times and experiences to our lives because we've become so attached to looking at things with the physical, because we've lost that cultural imperative where we're looking at things as an extension and the actuation of the spiritual. So we're looking for the core and the root of the spiritual experience first. You know, I already know what this person does to my sexual nature, but what do they do? What do they do for me beyond the heart chakra? You know, in those esoteric chakras, what am I feeling when I'm around this person? When I hear this person speak? Am I feeling a drain in those spaces? Am I finding that the only thing that's invigorated in me is my lower awareness? If I start to think about them from my head space, do I get a headache? You see? So a lot of times, you know, when it comes to, and too many times, when it comes to how we're attaching ourselves to people, we're not really looking for the restoration, you know, of our continuums. We're not looking for the restoration and the continuation and the realization of our historical continuums, you know, as far as the higher parts, the good parts of our traditions, but we're limiting ourselves based on the existing order. You know, based on what we feel our existing expectations should be. And we're not establishing a new order of unlimited potentiality, even in our mating. So, of course, we're not establishing a new order of unlimited potentiality in our nation building. You know, we just want some basic stuff where we're looking at the nations that are around us without realizing that each nation is supposed to represent a unique symbol and a unique glyph and a unique character in the world's social space, you know, the world's social scape. So we look at some of the nations around us, and especially when I see some of the bureaucracy and some of the ambitions towards paperwork, going back to that again, you know, some of our people, some of our groups, they're very stuck in the idea that if you file certain papers, that you could be free. So they're basically showing you how to get freedom papers without forgetting that the oppression, choosing my words carefully here, but the oppression and the downtroddenness of the warrior spirit of many of our people, like, you know, Yaa Asantewaa and Harriet Tubman and Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and George Jackson and, you know, so many people who have come before us and really presented a certain idea and image of the warrior spirit that, you know, the killing of that and the destruction of that was really multidimensional. There were different directions that those images were attacked on. It wasn't just the bureaucratic and the paperwork or the legal aspect, but it was also the spiritual aspect as well, the economic aspect. And, you know, as you're going through your nation building, exertions, you begin to see all of the different places that our ancestors had to recognize the value of their resistance on. It wasn't just, I'm gonna fill out some paperwork because I'm gonna claim that. All right, that's cool. That's one thing. You do that. Do that. I'm not taking away from that. Do that. But then there's also the epidemic of the self-destructive violence that our youth participate in. You know, not just our young males, but our young females as well. Very violent. You know, that's a front that we have to resist on. We have to resist the enemy within in that sense, because sometimes it's our own children, it's our own family, and of course the postures that our enemies on the outside have taken to disassemble and decimate our methods and our goals. You know, so we start to use a more circular and a more communal and a more holistic perspective to facilitate the communion with our systems again, to facilitate the communion with our traditions again, and to make sure that it's so encompassing that it facilitates an intergenerational flow continually of culture, of history. Like it's almost a self-regenerative dynamic flow and discourse that we're having with our spiritual world. We're celebrating with our youth, and we're adapting this circle in a way we're developing a more liberated indigenous personality. You see, now the only way to develop that more liberated indigenous personality is to look at what we need to attack on multiple fronts, and sometimes we get stuck. Each person is trying to tell you which one is most important, you know, and that's challenging. Like, I'll give you an example. If you ever have an opportunity, which you better make an opportunity for, to read Chancellor Williams' Destruction of Black Civilization, right? And that's it's like, I guess what I would call like a staple book. You know, I think when you start to come into your realizations of freeing up, right? You know, I like to use that term a lot. You know, like, you may hear me, freeing up, you know, but you start to come into your revelations of freeing up and trying to get to some of your more chief and premier ideas, and reestablishing again some of those chief and premier ideas. There may be certain basic information that you want to come into and just kind of get under your belt. And of course, for each time it changes, right? You know, new things come out and stuff like that. But the destruction of Black civilization is powerful from many levels. And just like a lot of my students, I always, you know, when they come into spirituality, especially the females, I like to refer them to Marta Vega. You know, if anybody has read The Altar of My Soul, now I know a lot of you students like, yeah, he told me to read Altar of My Soul, but such a beautiful book, you know, that Marta had written, and, you know, about her journey, you know, being initiated into Santeria and that whole process, and a lot about, you know, it's not just her initiation into the tradition, but what I found very valuable was, you know, some of the depictions that she laid out in her work about how she grew up, you know, as a young person who was identified herself as Puerto Rican, and the experience, the communal experience, even before the tradition, but just how we interacted as a collective, as a group who still had what we call some of our culture still intact. So you start to see how those values translated themselves over into even her initiations, when you see a community coming together to make sure she's cool and taking care of her, and then what she went on to do, you know, she has a Caribbean Cultural Center here in the city, but what she went on to do for her people, again, from a communal perspective. So a lot of times you may, like, students say, oh yeah, he told me to read that book, because trying to let you see that, you know, there is quality of community outside of just, I want to be initiated, I want to get initiated, I. You know, you start to look at some of those other values. But like I said, when just something as simple as like one of the points, well, I guess it's not a simple point, it's how you look at it. But I was referring to Chancellor Williams and Destruction of Black Civilization. But, you know, one of the points that he makes as far as like the relationship between Kemet and Ethiopia, I think is very significant, especially for those who are very hard pressed and I would say even to some degree stuck in Kemet, you know, and Of course, there's a great body of work, and you're looking at a civilization at definitely at certain times. Some may even perceive at their apex. And just some of the great monuments that were built. Dealing with the entire Nile Valley civilization, you start to see, man, there's a long perspective history of greatness. In that space, but Chancellor Williams. If you read this, there's a section in that book. I'm trying to remember the chapter name, but I know Egypt is in the chapter name, and it's one of the earlier chapters, and it's like something like the rise and fall of a civilization or something like that. But he basically shares that he calls Egypt, or Kemet, the daughter of Ethiopia, right? Now, I'm not going to go off into that too much because I want you to read the book anyway, for those of you who haven't. But that was very significant, I feel, as a statement to make about Kemet and its relationship to Egypt, once you say it's a daughter of this particular civilization, and of course, obviously, it's Chancellor Williams. So he takes you through the history, he takes you through the history of the different kingdoms and stuff like that. And, he shows you why you could make a statement like that, of course. But when you're nation building, you're looking at all of the attacks from different angles. So, like one of the things that I mentioned earlier, or not earlier, but in previous segments, the fascination with Kemet. Why, so many scholars who purport to be, people who bring self-awareness and nation building and nationhood to a displaced and vanquished people, why it seems like so much of this study revolves and centers around Egypt or Kemet, right? Or Tameri. Well, this is the underlying sadness of it. And we can hit a lot of the reasons. It has one of the greatest bodies of translated literature, if it's ever really been translated, but translated literature. And of course, you can go and see the great monuments. It's easy to see the monuments. It's also one of the cheaper tickets. If anyone has ever been, it's one of the cheaper tickets to get there. Plane tickets, I'm saying, And so we have so many different reasons why we celebrate it, and we should celebrate it. I'm not taking that away. I'm just going to say personally, I've often noticed that people celebrate it because it's more exotic than some of the other kingdoms. It doesn't seem like people were dancing in the dirt. Real big, rough African-looking people were dancing in the dirt and pouring water and cutting chickens' heads off in circles made of chalk to find out what's going to be what. So it gave a more exotic but sterilized view of our culture, right? And ultimately, I think it's embraced so strongly because non-Africans embraced it. Non-melanated. Well, everyone's melanated, but melanoid, those with epidural melanoid, they embraced it. So whatever they embrace, you go ahead and embrace too. Now, I know that may be kind of an offensive statement to some, but understand the context of what I'm saying. And so I have to reiterate, because I know people like to take bits and pieces and then get upset and go run and pout. I'm not saying that we do away with Kemet. As you notice in my teachings, I reference Kemet a lot, but I reference many other places too, because there's so many other cultures, there's so many other ideas that existed on the continent. But when we come into our cultural understandings, we tend to make a beeline for Kemet and we stay stuck there forever. And I posture again because of the different things that I said, but also because it was highly embraced by foreign cultures. So people stay stuck there. When you go anywhere on a continent, you're going to find a deepness and a profundity of culture. You're going to find different deities and archetypes that represent the different divisions of all of the different dimensions that, the Most High has really expressed itself to, beyond the Nubia or the Kush aspect, which again, you're dealing with like southern Ethiopia at that point. But a lot of times people just stay stuck there because it's received a seal of approval by the very same people that have made you feel the most inferior. So sometimes the methods and the goals of that inferiority complex are so deeply entrenched that we don't realize that we've orientated our way around a sociocentric and adaptive model that always has to look for approval externally. That's one of the attacks. Like when I said the attacks are represented in multiple ways and in multiple directions, sometimes we don't realize that even when we come into what we consider to be our cultural transformation and reconstruction, that we're only still reconstructing ourselves around the ideas that have been planted deep down inside. See, that's the beauty of cultural celebration, because through cultural celebration, which is really spirituality, right? It's like the culture that we were given through the Nguzu Saba, right? Of Umoja and Kui Chakalia and Ujima and Uchama, Nia, Kuamba, and Imani, and doing those things, we're constantly setting the ultimate cultural and ideological goals that will develop us, and we celebrate those things. But essentially what they start to do is they start to highlight and flush out some of that other adaptive teaching and learning that we've encountered that malforms our objectives as a people. All right. So it's critical a lot of times. Unfortunately, I know we don't do it so much, but it's critical sometimes to even look at, even when we're celebrating certain things as far as our cultural way, and as far as our path, why are we celebrating this particular thing? Like, why is this the one? Why is this the thing? I was talking to someone recently, I don't remember who, but I was saying, a lot of times, even when we come into our better mind, right? And we start to look at each other and, even in our mating, like I've said this to men before, some of the terms and the ideas that we have, for like women are still based around previous programming. So like I've heard, sometimes men will talk about, oh yeah, man, his sister has a beautiful set of locks, man. She's got her locks come down to her back. She's got a flowing set of locks. And I used to look at that and I would say things were like, what about the bald-headed sister? What's up with her? And nobody's really checking for her. Or what about the sister over there with the PZ afro? What about her? So like even sometimes when we come into those understandings, right? We're still looking for that same aesthetic to be satisfied. So yeah, she has locks, but they have to be long and flowing. Or they have to be styled in a way where they are reminiscent, or they bring that certain value that we're looking for from the aesthetic of those who have conquered us, for it to be acceptable to us. So a lot of times, even in our cultural understandings, we have the same exact kind of thinking. We have the same exact kind of thinking where, we're locking ourselves into a model of thinking and being that really has very little to do with the engagement that we're supposed to have with language and concepts that are appropriate to what we would consider to be our cognitive and our performance development in all of the different spheres of our own personal enculturation, and making sure that enculturation is sitting and resting on the principles and the applications of our own self-generative abilities to create a new paradigm that reflects the nation-building imperative. You see, sometimes we're just not locked into that idea. We're just not there. So we're looking for something. We're looking for a more sterilized experience, so we just don't feel so embarrassed around those who we hold in such high esteem, even though we shouldn't. But we're just looking for an experience that we can share there that doesn't really make us seem too indigenous. It just don't make us seem too indigenous, So, and speaking, and like you guys know, man, the first Sunday of the month, I always try to keep it somewhat light, in dealing with whatever the topic is for the month, and really try to show some of the generally, I guess I could say, accepted precepts about whatever it is that we're talking about, and if it does hold the value to what we're doing or not. Now, of course, because you've heard me say this before, I'm gonna say it again because it's a topic. When you're dealing with nation building of any shape, form, or fashion, it begins with the individual, right? And then it spans out to the couple. And then from the couple, it goes to the family. So, of course, we can't really speak about nation building without speaking about family building and the value and the purpose of effective leadership and vision and administrative ability inside of a family paradigm. We have to see the leadership of the indigenous family, if we consider ourselves to be indigenous, but we have to see the leadership of the indigenous family as something that's done by elders and people who have modernized themselves. And when I say modernize themselves, become in tuned and reflective of the external environment in which they live in. Not just stuck into a crystallized paradigm of what we were and what we should have been, but really looking at what effective leadership requires, which is vision. It's moral consistency. It's having that consciousness and that responsibility of history, and it's having philosophical clarity, philosophical courage. So there's no ambiguity. Again, some of the things that I witness sometimes with some of the groups and some of the folk, it's like there's a moral. There's no call or requirement for moral continuum. Like there's no I don't need to have a moral consistency and a moral history of consistency. Like I can kind of flow in and out as long as I'm saying something that gets you jumping and moving. Then I don't really need to have too much consistency when it comes to my morality. I can have some fun. I could have some fun with it, and I don't necessarily advocate that, for people who are looking to effectively nation build. Now, if you're looking for a church experience and something that's churchical and something that gets you hyped for the moment and get you excited for the moment, then absolutely, go with the person who's endowed with the greatest ability to stir up your spirit and to get you most excited and to get you most into things, But if you're looking for effective leadership, you got to look for some consistency, so it's just like a little, little advice there, man. Try to find the consistency in those who you are committing your way to and committing your money to at times, and committing your thinking and your ideas to. You want to really see if you can search for consistency in that sense, man. And you want to make sure that your personal aim is to develop an awareness of all of the necessary qualities that leadership needs to be inoculated with, and the necessary values and skills that are necessary in the leadership of your people. Because we all need different kinds of leaders. And our leadership has to reflect the things that are needed on a basis that we've mutually agreed that, hey, this is prominent, this is necessary. And honestly, that's usually, you hear me talk about men being leaders within inside of their homes. And so the person who really needs to, let me centralize this a little bit, but the folk who really need to really develop that awareness of women, really need to, and I'm saying on a familial level and, domestically inside of your home, but I'm also saying outside in your community and on a national level. It's really the women who have to make a conscientious effort to say, hey, we need to develop an awareness of the qualities of leadership and to develop an awareness of the values and the skills that a leadership needs to possess in order to develop us as a people. When I say us, I mean men and women alike, our children, our babies, but we're really the ones as females that need to come into that skill. Because if you think about it, if you look at it, women are the main ones that get tricked by fake leaders. I'm laughing, but I always laugh at the heaviest and saddest things to try to chip some of the harshness off of it. But the truth is, it's actually females who get tricked the most by fake leaders. because they've never developed that skill to see that. Because in order to be able to determine those necessary skills, you have to be group conscious, you have to be group concerned, and you have to have morality within yourself, which is a lot of times doesn't exist inside of the same females who are being tricked. So we feel bad for mom, man, she's being led astray, but she's just as foul, but just in a different way. So you don't have to really feel bad for them. Too tough. Because someone who actually really has a love for the people and a love for their ancestors and a love for their spirit and their culture, they don't really get tricked as much. They can see through things pretty quickly. It's the ones who just have a love for self. They're completely self-absorbed in what it is that they want to be and want to do. Then they usually are the ones who are taken by that type of leadership. So you really, even as a woman, you want to try to form a united and common effort against your own inability to spot what's necessary for your people. Because a lot of times not every time, but it's been my experience. A lot of times leaders don't know that they're supposed to be leaders. They don't have that sense of self-awareness where they say, I am what my people need. I am the answer to my people's problems, and typically a person who talks like that, you don't want to be around them too much. You know it and I know it. Someone standing, I'm the one, I'm the one. You got to come over here, get with me, and I'm the only one who has a solution. I've heard people say things like that, like, I'm the most requested speaker on the planet. No one has done more for our people than me. I'm the king of this. I'm the prince of that. I'm booked up. I'm booked up through the entire year. I'm booked. When you hear that level of self-aggrandizing, then chances are you're dealing with someone who's unaware of anything. But it's just a distorted and skewed leadership personality, because the leadership personality is usually not aware that they're supposed to be the leader. Just like God is never aware that it's actually God. God doesn't know it's God. God is just being. And then those who consider themselves subject to or inferior to will say, that's my God. But, if you are a superior being, and you're moving in a superior fashion, then you're not going to be aware of yourself like that, because your superiorness often creates a perfection. And in your perfected state, the only way to become self-aware is that you have to go inside of yourself. You have to stop striving to be for a moment, and you have to just, stop striving. You have to just exist within the void and feel yourself fall into the void. And if you can't feel yourself fall into the void, you'll never be self-aware, because through your falling, you look up at yourself and say, oh, that's what I look like. So it's like falling into the void of humanity when the creator in any form spits us out. We come here and then we look up to the heavens and say, oh, how beautiful art thou? How beautiful the heavens are. But we didn't know when we were up there, because we were stretched out and constantly moving in motion to our perfectedness. So leaders are kind of the same way. They don't really know they're leaders. They're just doing what they know to do, right? And then it's those who are able to look at them externally and say, you are what we need. You are the answer to what we need, So you go on and do that. But those who are using that language on a consistent base, man, they ain't doing nothing. They're not doing anything but just making money off of you, really. At the end of the day, they're just making money off of you, So yeah, it's important, a lot of times for women to develop that level of sensitivity and that awareness, and really become committed, to finding leaders who will eliminate any type of behaviors that are typical of exploitation, typical of sexual exploitation. You want people who, willing to eliminate those type of experiences and be sensitive and aware of that, and to foster an awareness of higher goals and of the social activism and the world order that it is that we're looking to create and we're looking to establish. So within nation building, different groups have different responsibilities. And again, I understand based on our phases of development into the Anglo mentality, within the Anglo sphere, when you start to say, as soon as you say different, it's a problem. You look at some of the comments under my videos, you see it. People have said rude, asinine things. This guy is locked in gender roles. Well, once you call me this guy, I already know you're an a-hole. I already introduced myself, so why would you say this guy? That's rude. And who are you talking? Why don't you shut the hell up? No, let me stop. But people just are always quick to want to assert opinions that nobody asked for. Go create your own channel and do that. But that's a part of the sickness that we have, being in the Anglosphere, where we're constantly violating the respect and the sanctity and the sacredness of people's sacred space, So you really want to look at people who are able to, foster not only higher goals, but have a sense of more social humanity and develop a commitment to advancing our national goals, with being able to hold strong in whatever our psychic and constitutional entrenchment is, and whatever it is that we say we came to be and we came to do, right? But we each have a different thing, so like the feminine aspect, will fall back into the sunken place and look, to become self-aware, not to be about the eyes so much, right? But to become self-aware and say, this is what we need, right? This is what we gotta have. This is what we're gonna need in order to produce. Because her job is production, right? Her job is to produce stuff. So she's centered upon the realities and the ideas of producing. So she's aware, or at least she better get aware. If she's not aware, she's got to be aware of the substances, the creative substances that are needed for her to do what she came to do so well, which is produce things in this reality, to manifest things. So then she looks at individuals and she looks at experiences to say, who's gonna make sure my soil is protected? I got this great, awesome, rich, fertile soil. It's awesome. And if it's exposed to the elements, or if it's treated incorrectly, if it's exploited and not cultivated, then my soil will turn acidic, and it will bring forth fruit that's not as healthy as it should and could be, right? So she looks for the sun to expose her soil to, just the right sun. Yeah, you can bring the best out of my soil. You'll turn me acidic. Get away from me. Right. So, part of her job is to become self-aware in that sense. So she's more aware of her projected outcomes and the generative themes of nation building that she needs to produce and bring forth. So sometimes we have individuals who can present picturesque displays of what it is that we think we're supposed to want, man. But the more critical thing is to be able to come into a space where we remove our fixations, on people who are really just about materialism and sexploitation, and individualism, and they just have an ideological focus that's not based upon our own socio-political values, but really just looking to recreate some of the sicknesses that we've been stuck in for some time. So they're not really involved in the community and the interactive cultural formations that are needed to establish a knowledge base that can reinforce, again, the uniqueness and the valuable principles that our cultural continuum can bring forth. So it's the women who help us to see and help us to be what it is that we're supposed to be in that sense, That's really a female's job, right? Or the feminine job. Let me correct my statement. That's really the feminine role, the feminine job, right? And then, of course, men as the leader, you have to cultivate humility and respectfulness and family-centeredness and truthfulness. Good gravy. Stop lying. So many get caught in lies, man, in these communities, cultural and conscious communities, man. Stop lying so much. So, and a lot of the lying comes because they haven't established discipline. Why haven't they established self-discipline? They haven't established self-confidence. Having a studious nature, it's really important, when you're looking at some of just the basic practical applications of male leadership. That's so necessary, man. Being able to clarify what your criteria is. I see some people who talk about nation building and banging on the system and things like that, but we don't really know what it means ultimately. Like what does it mean? Like, like when you say you're out here putting in work, like, okay, it's cool, but what exactly does that mean? So as someone who's coming under the instruction of someone, you're saying, well, this person is one of my teachers or my teacher, whatever, or they're establishing a national paradigm that you're like, yeah, I like that. I can do that. I can get with that. What's the 10-point plan? And always understand that it's like the Kabbalistic tree of life. There's going to be a front end and there's going to be a back end, right? So you're going to have the Black Panther Party, the political party, and then you're going to have the Black Liberation Army, right? So you're going to have the front, and then you're going to have the unseen back. So you may have a 10-point plan that you put out to be distributed amongst the masses, but that's the entrance. Can you get with this? But there's got to be a back end 10-point plan too. Like you got regular world, you got bizarro world, and the reason being is because whatever 10-point plan that you put out into the community, your enemies are just gonna disempower it. They're gonna disassemble it, break it down, and then counteract it with whatever the principles are that they bring forth. So you got to be careful. Everything is not necessarily for public consumption, because the truth is the public isn't gonna apply everything anyway. They're gonna usually apply things based on their own trends of what they feel is enriching to them. So you may have that front, and then you'll have the back, maybe things that are like, you hear me sometimes talk about generals talk. Well, this is a generals talk. What are we having sitting at the war table? Because you're not necessarily going to let the origins and the concepts and the ancestral wisdom, the real ancestral wisdom, be kind of assimilated and processed by the masters in that sense. That would be stupid. So a lot of times you may present things in symbol form, and those who have the ability to tap in because they're functioning on that frequency, they'll understand the symbol, and those who don't, it's not for them. So everything is not for the broader community, especially if you've not established a community as of yet. A lot of the things that you'll do in your nation building, if you're truly nation building, are going to be about casting your net. Cast my net, then look through and see the value. So you begin to snatch up, like you hear me talk about sometimes, like, a lot of I've ran a lot of different programs and things like that. Some of you come from some of those programs. And why do you come from some of those programs? Because I came in with the idea to snatch you up. You just didn't know it. I just did it. I was just smooth about it. I was just real smooth about it. But when I came into that cultural center that you may have met me, or some of you came from the programs that, like after school programs that we ran, you didn't know I was looking at you and saying, yeah, that's random. When I leave, that one's coming with me. But part of what we have to do is to snatch up some of the greatest talent that we have, so we can begin to develop that sense of beauty inside of them, that sense of righteousness inside them, so that that can be spread. So we're developing a commitment inside of people to reconstruct their culture and to really dive into a more critical and creative analysis of where we're at and where we need to be. So you're looking at those who function with that kind of mind already, so you're moving quick and you snatch them up quick. That's the key. You get them quickly. You're not doting around, man. You understand the responsibility and the sense of urgency that's on you. So you're bringing values from antiquity to the contemporary very quick, and then you're putting it in front of them, and you see how they respond to them. You see if it starts to establish a different kind of sense of development and unity and historical consciousness inside of them, or if it's like, oh, that's cute. And if it is, like, okay, all right, well, keep it going. Because essentially what you're doing is you're finding, it's like blowing on a dandelion. The seeds spread all over the place, right? So you're just finding the dispersion of genius seeds. Those genius seeds that came from, our greatness, like Moreau and Axum, and Nubia and Kemet and Kush and, all of the great civilizations of the world, and how we've kind of dispersed ourselves and dispersed our consciousness like Osir getting cut into 14 pieces. You're moving quickly, and you find out through just human divine methods and ancient cultural methods that bring out and manifest the best in people. You find out where those seeds have spread, if that person or those people may be a part of that original divine essence that complements, the work that you're seeking to do. So you're transmitting knowledge of your tradition, and you're transmitting the development and the celebration and the appreciation that you have for your tradition, in order to bring out the major principles inside of people that speak to family and that speak to community and that speak to nation. You see? So when you're nation building, your mind and your thoughts are always advocating and pressing towards that greater sense of nationalism, and documenting and transmitting some of the greatest discourses that our people have had with the cosmos. That's what we call spirituality. It's just a conversation. It's just your ancestors playing chess with Olodumare. All right, I'm gonna do this better. All right, we'll do it better than Jack. All right, I'm gonna do that better. All right, well, sucker, go ahead. You ain't saying nothing but a thing. All that old school stuff like that. So it's just really having that type of deeper level conversation, and finding opportunities to transmit that. That's what nation building is, man, and it's so necessary because, like I said, we're losing sometimes a lot of our uniqueness. We're losing a lot of our uniqueness in our walk and in our way, and some of us are even losing languages. Right, we're even losing languages and not realizing that uniqueness and that singular continuum, that story that we present, becomes one of the greatest aspects of our anchorage. So that way we can go on and do other things while not having the fundamental assumptions of limitations of achievements and the fundamental assumptions of how far our collective mind has extended itself to. We can start to see that the righteousness and the morality and the beauty and the genius that we're looking for in the world begins with our family. It begins inside of our family relationships, when we're praising our fathers and we're loving our mothers and we're cherishing the relationships that we have with our cousins and our brothers and our sisters, and we're learning the virtue of good men, and we're learning the virtues of good women, and we're learning the discipline that comes along with that, and like I told a young person recently, the silence, knowing how to shut your mouth, is one of the great tenets of growing up. You see that a lot of times in disagreements. It's the person that's yelling and screaming too much. Even sometimes when the negotiators and the mediators show up, it's the one who's still yelling and screaming. Yelling and screaming for shut up. I had to go through a counseling session, I think it was some months ago, with some young people, and they were acting up, and it was a physical altercation. It was between a boy and a girl. And when I got there, I was like, all right, well, let's sit down at the table, let's figure out what happened, because y'all ain't gonna be putting your hands in front of each other in front of me. So we don't have to worry about that. And as I'm talking, the girl just kept going off. And then when she was going off, the boy started using profanity. I was like, wait, hold on. Since when do y'all think y'all curse in front of me? What are you doing? I don't care how mad you are. I don't care what just happened. You're not going to violate me like that. So, it's that aspect there where, we're looking for the righteousness inside of each other first. We're looking for the morality inside of one another first. We're looking for the virtue inside of one another first. And we're holding each other to that standard internally first before we go and interact with the world. So our nation building becomes so important because we're building ourselves, our enrichment and our greater aspects first inside of our loving collectives. before anything else happens. And like I said, the value of that silencing, learning to listen and learn those transmittable values. So like when they were going off and I was saying, no, because they're both like 17, 18. I was like, y'all are grown. So I'm here now, so shut your mouth, both of you. You know, your grownness or your maturity should let you know when to be quiet. You know, regardless of how upset you are, regardless of how many things are bubbling over, you now have an opportunity to get beyond whatever it is that was ailing you, whatever it is that was bothering you, you see. So we're going to dig obviously much deeper. You know, I think it may end up being a more, some are going to drop out a lot this month. I know it's coming because it's going to be like Thunderground Thursday, where there's a lot of action. Remember the theme, action. You know, it's going to be a lot of that type of spirit that we're going to explore this month. So I know a lot of people are not really, you know, gonna, you know, feel like hearing all that. You know, it's like enough. You know, so I know that's going to kind of be the theme for some. You know, a lot of times it's just too much to have those charges put on you. You know, where it's like, yeah, you know, what are you going to do? So, but I think for a lot of others, especially those who are looking for those first steps that you hear me talk about so much, you know, where do we begin? Where do we start? And how do we kind of get our stuff together? How do we kind of get our lives together in a way where the things that we're trying to do make sense? And like I said, we're coming out of this crisis of goals. You know, we're coming out of this crisis of activity, and we're able now to look at just our world reality and start to look at the contributions that we're making into the world reality, because of course we're not stuck, you know, inside of that crisis. I know for those who are about getting something done or who are excited about doing something, I think it will be a very good month. But because I know you, I know that for a lot of people it's gonna be, I don't want to hear that mess, man. I don't want to hear that crap. You know, you can't tell me what to do, you know. So I know for a lot of folks it's going to just be like an experience where yeah, you just kind of want to you're going to want to drop out of hearing it. So I'm saying that to warn you now. You know, so you don't end up kind of just feeling, you know, like this isn't what I wanted this month. You know, I wanted more words. You know, all right. So we're gonna get ready to get out of here because we have the men's call in about 3 minutes, and I stepped on it last time, and I don't want to do that. So that gives all of you men who are involved in that call an opportunity to go and get into a quiet space and, you know, get ready for what it is that you're getting ready to do with the other men of this experience. And you know, let me also say, like I said, for those of you who tuned in late, we are going to get the women's call back up and running. But for right now, like I said, I had to put a pause on it because, you know, we need more eldership, you know, among the women. So until I'm really able to get that, you know, going like I know it should, and I know, you know, and I'm saying because I'm putting it on me, right? I'm putting it on me. I'm not blaming anybody. So some people might say it doesn't need all of that. Okay. You know, but I'm putting it on me that I feel that elder women should be in place, man. Sisters need that for more than one reason. It's not just for the I knew call. Forget that. I don't care about these little rinky dink calls. All right. So it's not for that. They're just an entrance into something greater and into something better. All right. So we have to start off with our framework, right? Our framework dictates that we don't do anything without our council present. We don't do anything without our elders present, without our ancestors present, without our spirits present. So, you know, I'm putting it on me. All right. Anybody who wants to kind of get upset, it's something that I see as being very necessary. And peace to you as well, Mfame and Malika Boussolet. That was the family who handled the Toronto situation, you know, and for your gifts as well. Beautiful gifts, you know, family, right? Yeah, you understand. All right. But we're gonna head out, like I said, because I don't want to step on it. All right, and yeah, I'll see you next Sunday. And of course, my little videos and stuff I'm gonna do in between. Maybe I might do this week little something that I kind of get with the people. All right, but until such time, this is Chief signing out. All right, be well, be safe, and make sure you start really wrapping your head around what it is that we're talking about, because I think it's going to get a little ugly this month. I have a feeling. Yeah. All right. Hotep pool.